Norman Rockwell is one of the great illustrators of the 20th century. He's inspired and influenced artists who want to capture his realism and his ability to bring life to his characters. Now, this book, Norman Rockwell, Illustrator, talks a little bit about his life, his process, and shows us some of the work that he did for the Saturday Evening Post. Norman Rockwell was a commercial illustrator in the sense that he did artwork that was meant to be published for magazines, and we can see him here in his studio, happy guy smoking his pipe. You can read through in his biography. It was a thankless grind, and his studio mate, a cartoonist named Clyde Forsyth, kept telling him that he ought to be aiming instead at the covers of America's most dominant magazine, the Saturday Evening Post. So as a freelance illustrator, he was doing the best he could to get his work out there into the world, and at that time, being in that publication was quite an achievement. He's got these great little illustrations that he did, these ink illustrations that are put here on the side as you're reading through and learning more about him. And then we can see here's lead pencil drawing by Rockwell's father. So, and here's a picture, age 6, with his brother Jarvis. He was born and spent his childhood on Manhattan's Upper West Side, where he was a choir boy. He inherited artistic talent from his father and his maternal grandfather, Thomas Hill, an English artist who emigrated to this country. So Rockwell never fakes a detail. He drew with photographic references, and he would do a continuous series of sketches until he had the perfect image. We can see some of his early art school sketches here. He's doing portraits, drawings from life, observing the natural world, and really, you can see his really strong grasp of the fundamentals of drawing. A wartime sketch, 1918, right? So World War I. And here we have some caricatures. So these are the contemporary pieces that he was doing. So here we are, that's our preface. And then we dive right into the Rockwell life. So here he is, he's got his kids learning to draw as well. So they get to actually visit with the artist. So this was 1946, and as they said, it was when he was most popular. And so there's a little bit in here about his studio. So let's take a visit to Rockwell's studio. Here he is. You can see he's working on a large canvas. So all those illustrations that you see for the Saturday Evening Post were done on these large canvases. And he's quoted as saying, "My studio has been likened to a factory. My product has been described as corn." So Rockwell had his own personal studio, and you can see this covered bridge sketch. And when we see the photos of where he lives here, here's that same covered bridge. The bridge over the Battenkill, the church, and Rockwell's residence. So this is where he worked, had his home studio. And here's the whole family: Norman, Mary, Jerry, Tommy, Peter, and the dog Rally. You can just see he was really great at capturing the likeness, and you can just really recognize his family in those photos. My studio burns. Oh no. So he's depicting what happened when his studio caught fire. And with the beams being exposed on this roof, you can see his really great drafting ability. Rockwell's new studio. So here's some more photos of the man at work and photos around the farm. There's even a floor plan of the studio designed by architect Payson Rex Weber. Here's what I really wanted to get to. This is how Rockwell paints a post cover. So wherever Rockwell goes, there's one question which is almost invariable, asked by laymen and artists alike. Tell me, Mr. Rockwell, how do you paint a post cover? There was a certain amount of photographic realism in the stuff that he was doing, and you can see he has these models posing for him. So they're holding the pose, and then he's putting the sketches together with charcoal. And in this instance, he's putting this charcoal directly onto the canvas. So for each one of his canvases, he would have been doing a really tight, detailed sketch, in charcoal. So here we have an example of how he went through. So the original idea sketch, the idea is that there are some figures fixing their broken down car with a shack in the background. So here's a quote directly from Norman Rockwell. "The first job is to hit on a good idea. Having found one for this cover, I made the accompanying rough sketch at the exact size. Then I took it to the post and Ken Stewart okayed it. Next, I scattered around the countryside seeking the old shacks, goats, and other things I needed. As each was found, I sketched it and also had it photographed. I borrowed the station wagon from the Ford agency and posed that." So here we have a kind of revised charcoal sketch. Okay, so he's coming up with the composition and the subject matter. And then here we have composition, again, revised. He's taken out the hillside and lowered it to this. This is what an Illustrator can do. He's turned it into this hilltop to really make it indicative of this lonely cabin. It's just floating there in the sky. Okay, and then here are some of the photos that he's taken. So here's a pose with the tire. Here are blanket with all the tools. It's got some figures to be sitting on the couch on the porch, the feet up, and here's the old shack that he's going to use in this illustration. Some goats, and look, he's even got the little outhouse. Okay, so photographic data. Again, we can get a quote directly from Norman Rockwell here. "For 23 years, I did all of my drawing and painting without any help from the camera. Even today, I often work without photographs. Yet I have found if they are properly utilized, they can sometimes prove an invaluable aid. Practically all illustrators use them to some extent. I feel very strongly, however, that no one should resort to photographs until he has learned to draw and paint extremely well without them. If eventually he turns to the camera as a supplementary tool, he will find it especially helpful in recording transient effects, difficult poses, and subject matter far from the studio. We shall deal with all this as we go along." Okay, so here's these more tightly rendered crayon studies drawn on tracing paper sheets. So now we're talking about huge sheets of paper, probably about the size of the canvas that he's going to be working on. So actual size. And so he's using the crayon. He's studying these goats. He's got his figures. He's got the dog. He's got a couple of different head studies here. A few different studies of the goat. You can see a slightly different turn of the head. With all the preliminary work disposed of, I went at these large crayon studies in which I further crystallized my ideas, selecting the best of the reference material and refining and combining it to serve my purpose. This making of studies is a vital part of cover design, In fact, the success or failure of a cover may depend largely on the thought and effort which go into it. These were drawn rather large, each about 2 feet wide. Norman Rockwell. And here are the color studies done in oil. So he's got the composition, and we can see here's this. This might be actually more done on location. Let's see. At this point, I normally draw an extremely complete and accurate charcoal layout at the exact size at which I intend to make my final painting, working over it until I am reasonably satisfied with every detail. Then I transfer the proportions to the canvas, using this method presented in Chapter 9, after which I determined upon my color scheme by making color study in 2 or 2 in oil. So he's doing these color studies, so he knows what type of palette he's going to be using. And you can see him making other changes. We go from the green on the automobile to this copper color, and you can see the hillside here is fairly brown with a little bit of green grass, and he's doing this to make sure that he understands the shape and the composition and the places where he wants to use color. He knows that this is going to be reduced in size, so he's putting in all this great detail, and then it's going to be shrunk down for printing. So here we have the finished painting ready for delivery. We can see all the different things that he's been practicing. The shack, the outhouse, little detail. He's put a little moon on that outhouse. And you can see he's got these figures really detailed. On the automobile, you can see it's also very detailed. So that is how he would get to this very tightly rendered oil painted illustration, going through that whole process. And here is another example of what one of his preliminary studies would look like. Often I make several of these color studies, thus having done my thinking in advance while working at relatively small scale. So again, we can see from concept to completion, and then the in-between step is that color study. So here we go, charcoal study. Once he's got the charcoal study, he can put this charcoal layout directly onto his canvas. And because the charcoal's pretty loose, you can actually go ahead and paint directly on top. And it says this final painting follows the study very carefully. So we have the cleaning ladies running the playbill. So this is, it just brings so much to imagination. The art of illustration is about telling a story. So not only are we leading our eye to these figures, first of all, then we notice the details. So they've got their brooms and mops. So it's their job to clean up the playhouse. And so they're kind of living vicariously by reading this playbill that's been left on the seat. So they didn't get to see the play, but they want to hear about the actors and relive that moment. And as we spread out, we can see, yes, there's other playbills on the chair. The show is over, and these are the cleaning women. So all of that story is told, the subject matter really, and the way it's composed, it really leads your eye and tells you the story as you scan through and take note of all the details. So I think it's a really admirable thing to look at, just the amount of effort that went into each of these, and they were done on such a fast pace and with such attention to detail. I think that that's what people admire most, his ability to render the real life objects and the figures with such realism. So instead of, and in this era, that's what was desired. So instead of photographs, covers for magazines and movie posters were all done with this really tight, detailed illustration. And we can see how this idea of sitting around preparing for Thanksgiving, peeling the potatoes. So we've got turkeys coming out of the oven and he's peeling the potatoes, and then here's looking straight on, basically the same thing. They're peeling potatoes. And this is an oil painting done in 1945 for the Saturday Evening Post, and this looks so detailed it almost looks like a photograph, especially in black and white at this small size. And here's more potato peeling. So he would really rework concepts and ideas. And here we have his first published illustration, 1911, when I was 17. One from 1912. The P in my signature stands for Percy. So Norman Rockwell dropped that. Okay, and then here we get into some of his other early published illustrations for different publications. Popular Science magazine, Farm and Fireside. This is his early work. We can see this really great attention to detail and realism. She came to a standstill, feeling none of the cold as she read the delicious words. So this is Louisa Alcott series. Louisa Alcott, author. Okay, so I'm going to kind of skip through and you can just really get a sense for how he evolved. You know, he really started with the great fundamental skills of observing form and figures and real attention to detail and realism. I liked what he had in that quote, saying that one shouldn't depend on photographic reference until one has mastered the art of drawing. And that might be, you know, concept of drawing from real life references. And so he's bringing these stories to life on the page, and he's willing to do the studies that it takes to really capture a believable, realistic quality. There's always a little bit of caricature where he's exaggerating some of the figures. You know, this boy here, they're waiting in the hospital waiting room. You can see injured man. This guy looks very nervous. This boy looks a little bit worried. He's got his hands clutched and his knees together. So he's not shy of exaggerating to tell a story. And so these are the kind of things that you can really get into if you're studying Norman Rockwell. And here we have foreground characters, background, midground, and there's a whole story being told just by the expression of the faces. Okay, this is Strictly a Sharpshooter for American Magazine, June 1941. My problem was to catch the excitement of the prize ring, to create a feeling of tenseness and action. So I journeyed to a club at Columbus Circle, New York, where I studied the effect of the smoke-filled room and the types of people who frequent such places. For my models, I relied mainly on my usual neighbors and friends. Elizabeth Schaefer, Meade's wife, posed for the belligerent female. Of course, she's really a fine lady, but you wouldn't know it here. The fighter standing beyond her was modeled by Clarence Decker, master of the West Arlington Grange. Both of these were posed in attitudes of tense emotional strain. Nip Noyes modeled the derby-hatted man next to Elizabeth, who appears again, derby and all, at the left. So take note of that. He was using friends and neighbors in order to get these poses. You can also just look at how many people he's putting into the scene. So each one of these faces is done with a real attention to detail and a lifelike quality. And as we're picking apart the scene, we're checking out all of the faces and the expressions, and it really gives us the sense of real human emotion, and that can really put us into the time and place. And it's really wonderful to have these moments captured. You know, this looks like some sort of blacksmithing competition. So these guys are trying to, who can make the most horseshoes. So this is really, you know, something of its time, 1940. They're gambling to see who can make horseshoes the fastest. And you can look at the details like the veins coming out of this arm and just this overall form and gesture. Very, very realistic. And this would have, you know, influenced comic book artists of the time. And I think there are a lot of artists who've seen Norman Rockwell over the years and aspired to have the level of skill that he possessed. This is another great to see. Here's the color study to the final. So he's doing this entire color study just as a warm-up before he creates this final illustration. And then even this charcoal study down here below. This charcoal study is amazing. Wish we could see that larger. So I could go through and show you everything here. I just thought this was a really great example of a 20th century artist. Really great figures here, and also, you know, these are either lead or charcoal illustrations. With these pen and ink illustrations discussing the common cold, we can really take a close look at the kind of stuff that he was doing with his brush and nib. I really like to point out to illustrators the techniques of creating texture. So all those little tick marks and things that really show you the form, they're also catching the shadows that you would see around the edge of things. So those little tick marks that are showing you the texture, you can see it really great on this blanket. You see that kind of wrapping around the edge, and you can feel the fuzziness there. And it's those little imperfections on a surface that would catch the shadows, so you can really get a great sense of form. So you're not really outlining every single thing, but you're showing the form with those little imperfections being shown with the shadows. So this is a great example of Norman Rockwell's ability to illustrate with line. So these black and white. This series was all about the common cold. No dances, no date, no fun. Cheer up, it could have been no tissues. And here we have another self-portrait of Norman Rockwell. One of Norman Rockwell's most iconic pieces of work and most widely published was The Four Freedoms. So we have freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. He was saying that this work would have been better off done by Michelangelo. But Michelangelo wasn't around, so Norman Rockwell filled the shoes. The last part of this book is 30 years of Rockwell post covers. So here he is from the crib. Notice he's got his pipe in each one of these. the child, the young man, the old man, and here he is drawing the post from the grave. The title has been reduced to just the number P, and he's doing some sort of abstract cubism there. Cradle to Grave, Norman Rockwell. I'll go ahead and flip through 30 years of post covers. So we're starting out in 1916. (1917, 1918, 1919). I feel like the old man of the mountain when I realize that I have done covers during 2 world wars. I painted this January 18th cover while in the Navy. I was allowed free materials and models and, of course, board and lodging. So I was in the same salary class as the admirals. Norman Rockwell. (1919, 1920). This July 31st cover was one of the most popular I ever did. In 1920, Ford jokes abounded. The Ford car was almost always good for a laugh. My models were Mr. and Mrs. Dave Campion and family. I used Dave frequently. He had a news store in New Rochelle and was a wonderful model. (1921, 1922, 1923). December 8th, 1923. During this period, post covers were black and red. Posing for his December 8th cover was the nearest these carolers ever came to musical performance. Dave Campion couldn't play the violin, nor could Pop Fredericks play anything, and Bill Sundermeyer had no ear for music. (1924 to 1925). Everything from a swashbuckler to young boys playing football, with the helmet flying right off of the boy's head. February 6th, 1926. I paid James K. Van Brunt $10 to shave off his 8-inch mustache, his pride and joy, before posing for this painting. It was like cutting down a great oak. He could never quite make the 8 inches again. Norman Rockwell. 1926, 1927, 1927, 1928. There's quite a bit of humorous exaggeration found in these posts and these post covers. These are reproduced at this smaller size. You can find all of the Saturday Evening Post covers online if you want to get a closer look. 1933, 1934. At this point, he's gotten away from having backgrounds, and we're just using this nice circular background to let the figures just pop right off the page. And for an illustrator, that would take less time, not worrying about backgrounds. This is a pretty iconic one, with all of the kit and caboodle as she walks across the cover. It seems that a family in Paris were debating whether or not to fly back to their home in Greece. They saw this June 4th picture of an old lady enjoying her plane trip and felt that they would be cowards not to return home via air, which they did. Later they wrote me a very friendly letter about it. Self-portrait. The artist faced with a dilemma. In agony of soul, this cover was done because the most terrible thing an illustrator has to face is a deadline. Often, it is a case of either getting a picture in on time, not done as well as you like, or doing it well and being too late to have it published. This portrait is reasonably accurate. Norman Rockwell. Norman Rockwell, he looks like a young kid here. You know, he was a very kind of wiry, thin guy. So here we see, this is the original artwork in color here. Here's how it looks, you know, in this reduced black and white example. We've got all kinds of gags in these covers. Can you find 45 errors in this April Fool's cover? I can see a deer under the chair. And a woodpecker. One of a long series of Willie Gillis post covers. After this appeared, I received many letters from Gillises asking where they could purchase the books shown at the bottom. So we can see the title change, and we can see that these pieces have really illustrative backgrounds as well. And here we are, we're coming up to December 23rd, 1944. A station poses for a portrait by Norman Rockwell. We have another GI returning home. Oh, I see these little details. We've got the family excited to see him, and we've got this young lady who's got this smirk on her face. She's happy for him to come home. It was a course of very gratifying to me when this painting was selected by the U.S. Treasury as the official poster for the 8th War Bond drive. More than 300,000 copies were placed on display. I was also pleased when it was honored at the Society of Illustrators show. Norman Rockwell. Oh, I love this. This is a really great example of storytelling through illustration. So we can see the man taking a swim here in the river, and he's hung up his tie and suit, put his hat and shoes so that he can get a quick dip. And then we see, you know, he's pulled over his cart on the side of the road, and we can see that he's a salesman. He's got his logo on the door and boxes full of this product. So this is your door-to-door salesman. George Zimmer was my model for this. Had it been painted in July, I'd have posed him in that very water, but March in Vermont, when the picture had to be made, is far too frigid for outdoor bathing. Norman Rockwell. And it says the original is 17 inches by 22 inches. So that's fairly small. It's very, very detailed. So we'll just flip through. There we go. That was some covers from the Post. Great example when you see it in detail here. He was really able to bring life to his characters by using these references, and every single one of these faces is telling a story. So they're gathered around as this veteran is talking to them. He's holding this flag. But you can also see the attention to detail and using the light that's falling on these characters to really separate them from the background. You can see the chiaroscuro effect of the white light on the top of this figure. Really makes him stand out from everything that's behind. So an illustrator can use a reference, but also change the lighting in order to make the whole composition work and everything read. This last section is about Rockwell's creative and technical procedure, and there's actually some really cool tips put in there. But I would say if you're interested in learning more about Norman Rockwell, you can go and find those full color images, the Saturday Evening Post covers, really great storytelling, and a really great attention to the subtleties of human emotion. There's just so much for humorists and cartoonists to pick up from the work that he did. A real master of economy of line and gesture to really communicate with the viewer. And that's why Norman Rockwell is so iconic, and he's rightfully being heralded these days as one of the true masters of illustration. So this has been Norman Rockwell, Illustrator from 1946. I encourage you to look into the history and get a closer look at some of these great works of art that he created. A true icon of the 20th century.